Mac Power Users, episode 637, digging deep on tracking time. Hello, everyone. This is David Sparks. I am joined by my co-host, Mr. Stephen Hackett. How are you today, Stephen?
I am good, David. How are you?
Excellent. And today we're talking about one of the nerdy things that I've been wanting to talk about on Mac Power Users for some time. We're talking about time tracking.
Yeah. This will be a fun one. Something that I've recently restarted in life. So we've both been doing it for a while now, and I think we got some fun stuff to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like time tracking is one of those things that a lot of people think you've gone over the deep end when you start doing it. And when I heard that you had tipped over to the side of time tracking, I'm like, man, we are doing a show. And actually, the show was your idea, but I was 100% in on it because I think it's really useful.
I do too. You know, it was something that I suggested in one of our calls, and you were like, yes, that one. Let's do that one.
Yeah. Before we get into it today on More Power Users, I have been doing a lot of experimentation with the iPad as an external monitor to my Mac.
Yeah.
I've mentioned it somewhat on the show, but I've gone deeper, and I thought that'd be kind of a fun topic for More Power Users. So we're going to talk about that today. But time tracking, as a young lawyer, that was the first thing they teach you. Like, you've got to track your time. In fact, I remember I worked for a summer for a different firm. When you're in law school, you get like a summer job.
Mm-hmm.
And the one of the old lawyers pulled me aside and said, "Look, if you're in the shower and you're thinking about a client, you bill for it. Always track your time." And I was thinking, that's crazy. That's one of the reasons I didn't take the job. When they offered me a job, I turned them down. I'm like, that's nuts, because it's like with a lawyer, it becomes like this grindstone, because some of these firms want you to bill so many hours that tracking your time becomes, just becomes murder. I mean, I did a session a few years ago at a law firm, and they asked me to come in and talk to them about using iPads. It was like one of these big fancy pants law firms, where they got like marble tables, everything's really fancy. So I go and I give them the talk, and they're feeding them lunch, and everybody in there is like not paying attention to me. And then as soon as it's over, like usually somebody will stick around and ask a question. Like as soon as it's over, they all like bolt out of there like they're gonna go, they've like like their spouse is having a baby or something. And so I asked the manager, I'm like, what happened here? I felt like I didn't connect with them. He's like, "Oh, I'm really sorry. It's the end of the month, so they're all trying to get their billings in." And I was thinking, oh man, that is hell. That is just hell, dude. Okay. So that's not the kind of time tracking we want to talk about today. We want to talk about time tracking for good, not evil.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of uses for this beyond the billable hour.
Yeah.
And, for people like you and me and a lot of our listeners where we make our living by time or by project, this can really give us critical information we need to make better decisions.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we have to accept as gospel here, and this is certainly true with me, is that if you think you know how you spend your time, you really don't. As humans, we are terrible at this. The best example for me is OmniFocus, right? It's the app I use to track tasks. I do project management in it. And I kept getting emails from people saying, "Yeah, what you're doing is great and I like it, but I don't want to make OmniFocus my job." And I got that. I understand. The job isn't to manage your tasks; it's to do your tasks. So
Right.
I got thinking, I think I spend too much time in my task manager. So then I started, tracking my time. One of the things I did is I made a specific category for planning time in my task manager, and I discovered that I'm spending like 20 minutes a day. That is not that much time compared to a work day to get all your work done and have a better focus on what you want to do. I was thinking it was like an hour. I mean, I just had no idea how little time I was spending there. And then I discovered at the same time, I was spending way more time on email than I thought I was. And that's the kind of information that you don't think, that you just don't have until you run a timer.
Yeah, I think that's totally right. And I mean, I know when I restarted time tracking at the beginning of this year, I was really surprised at how different my mental model of how I spent my time versus how I'm actually spending my time during the work week. Like the delta between the two honestly was much larger than I anticipated. And it kind of took me aback and made me kind of realize, okay, I'm spending my times on these things. And now armed with information, like I said earlier, I can make decisions. Where beforehand, it was basically just like a fairy tale in my head of how I spent
Yeah.
Monday through Friday.
Yeah, I agree. And the very best data you get is that first block of data, because that's where you find where you're really off kilter. Like if you're listening to this and thinking, oh man, maybe you're a former lawyer and the idea of tracking your time, gives you the shakes or something, we're not asking you to do it forever and all time. But what we are saying is this could really help you. So maybe you do it 1 week a month or 1 week a quarter just to get a quick check on how things are going, because that little tune-up, that first week Steven track, or maybe the first month, I mean, you learned so much that month, right?
100%.
What was the most surprising information in your first month of time tracking that you didn't realize?
For me, the most surprising thing, honestly, was the amount of time I was spending at my desk that sort of just fell in between the cracks of big projects. And some of it was just like wasting time on YouTube or social media, but just like time in between work, I guess. And I want to try to keep this like separate where we can of like block scheduling, because I think they are different things, even though they sort of approach the same endpoint. But I don't schedule my time that way. And so I was kind of surprised. Like I was in my office like 45 minutes between phone calls, and I don't have much to show for it in terms of moving the ball forward in any one direction. And that was just kind of surprising to me that, I'm only tracking like 5.5 or 6 hours of like focused work time during the day, but I'm spending 9 hours out here. Like I had to figure out where that other time was going.
Yeah. And if you read the studies, 5 to 6 hours of focused work a day is a win,
Yeah.
So don't be hard on yourself.
Oh, yeah. When I was a project manager, my previous life at a web development agency, we booked people hours. Like an engineer's time for a workday was 5 hours. We didn't schedule any more than that because you've got lunch and meetings and phone calls, and it was 5 hours of work is what we built into our schedules. But when you record a 2-hour podcast on one day, it's like, well, that's a big chunk of it. And so I was trying to like just figure all that stuff out. It took a little while.
Yeah. But the data you got on those in between hours was probably great, because you saw, well, what were you doing with that time? And, and one of the big uses for me for time tracking is the battle for delegation. Like I am of two minds on delegation. Number one is I appreciate and need it in my life. I mean, it's probably the biggest thing holding me back is that I want to control everything. That's really hard for me to let go and let other people do anything in relation to the stuff I make, right? I want to do it all. But, there's only so many hours in the day, and I only have so much energy in the day. So I either run out of energy or hours, and I don't produce as much. Whereas there's a bunch of pieces of this stuff that I could hand off if I could just get myself to do it. And every time I hand off stuff, I feel great about it, and it works, or almost every time. But I'm never sure what it is I'm supposed to hand off. And to me, that's another big benefit of time tracking is when you see I spent a lot less time on planning, so I can hold on to that. But man, I spent a lot of hours in email. What can I do about that? Can I offload some of the email to other people, or can I figure out a different way for people to communicate with me? And like that helps you identify the trouble areas and the potential areas for delegation or automation. And I find that probably one of the biggest benefits of doing time tracking is really helping me find where the areas are in my workday that can be addressed some other way.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about how we approach the buckets that time go into, because when I first started out on this, like I talked to my business partner, Mike Hurley, and the way that he does it is completely inside out from the way that it makes sense to me. And I guess I can go first. It's like my list of timers that I select from, they're all they're all project based. So each of my podcasts has a timer. And if I'm doing anything in the world of Mac Power Users, that timer gets clicked. So if it's show preparation, if it's recording ads, if it's doing stuff in the content management system or publishing, anything where I have the MPU hat on, that timer is running. So all of my podcasts have a timer, and I have a couple timers for various relay administrative kind of buckets of time. But I don't really have any timers for like, this is the time that I'm sitting down to do email. This is the time I'm sitting down to do task management. I tend to fall into project-based thinking. And I'm wondering what your approach is there.
Yeah, I put a list of my timers in the document here, and I don't really see any reason why I can't just stick this in the show notes. There's nothing secret in here. So what I do is we're going to talk about time tracking apps. There's two really good ones that we're going to focus on in today's episode. But what I do is I've got categories. So I've got family and friends, personal, health, focus, MacSparky, podcast, field guides, and some other stuff, right? So in those, I've got single purpose timers. Like in podcasts, there's one called MPU. And if I went back in time, at one point I would have like MPU planning, MPU recording, MPU, post-production. And like you, ultimately, I realized that was just, I was slicing the onion too thin.
Mm-hmm.
So I just have one for MPU, anytime I spend on this, because there's nothing in the MPU stack that I can delegate. I do all the planning. I have to record my ads. I have, all
Right.
that stuff, So I don't even really think about that, And then same thing with the field guides. Anytime I spend working on the Shortcuts for Mac field guide gets logged to the Shortcuts for Mac field guide. Then on MacSparky, however, I have sliced it up pretty good. Like I have comms, which is anytime I spend in, Slack for relay or answering email or any of that stuff. Or I have research time because I'm always like trying new stuff out, and I'm trying out new apps that might be, make it onto the show or into some other content, and I log that time. So I have like different categories of time I spend as MacSparky where I'm not, making a podcast or a field guide. So I break those down. And then, the other thing I do is I actually track personal time too. And a lot of people don't do that. And I don't necessarily recommend it, but it allows me to kind of keep a handle on how my time breaks down between things, if that makes sense. Like one of the things I realized when I decided to quit being a lawyer was that my actual family time was a lot smaller than I wanted it to be, and because I track family time. And I know that sounds silly, but, we're recording this the Tuesday after Easter. I got up early that morning. We had people at our house. I spent the whole day barbecuing and doing all the stuff that's related to Easter. And that was like a 15-hour family time day, right? But I tracked it. So I know at the end of the week, I did get a good chunk of time with my family this week, So I actually track that stuff too. But again, it's done in a very broad sense.
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't track any non-work time at all. For a little while, I had fitness as a timer, but I even got rid of that. Mine is solely work stuff gets in there. And I assume that if I look at a week's report and I've only got 20 hours of work, that something else must have been going on. But I kind of view that as like outside the realm of time tracking. That's interesting that we differ on that.
Well, I mean, I think I'm the outlier. I mean, it seems silly to it's like, oh, I'm going to work on Easter Sunday. I need to set my timer, right? I mean, that sounds crazy, but it's the data that I want at the end. Like health is a good one. Like I track the time I spend on health stuff, like fitness and even just going to the doctor and all that. And that, I like to see how much time goes into that because then I'll explain later, but I actually kind of hold myself accountable with the numbers I get out of this system. And like, what if I see that I'm not spending any time on health, well, that's not good. Right. So running the timer. And the way I run these timers, we're going to get into in this episode, but I use a ton of automation, and it's really not hard. But I do track the whole thing. I don't track time in bed. The one we're going to share, I added some here for sleep, which I don't really use. I have a nap one there. Sometimes I take a nap, I'll track that, but
nice.
I don't track the time, after I go to bed. But I also looked at last week's numbers, and I tracked about 15 hours a day for the whole week.
One way that I think people feel a little intimidated by this is like just how to get started with that organization. And, maybe my way or David's way sounds like it hits closer to home. The way that I initially started my list, because my list has changed over time. And I think the items that you track should evolve as your work and life change over time.
Yeah.
I sat down with a pen and paper and I wrote out like the big things that I work on I did it on a month scale because some stuff is every other week, some stuff is just monthly. I just kind of looked at my calendar, I looked at my task manager, I said, okay, in an average month, what sorts of projects or things am I responsible for? And my initial list came from that. Chances are you already have a feeling of what things you should be tracking, or if you want to get into this, some obvious places to start, because you already have these structures probably in your work life already. And it's a matter of kind of putting a name to them and figuring out where the edges are. And I would say that your list will change over time. And I even have, it's a little bit, I used to view it as a little bit of a cop-out, but I see it now as a useful tool. I have a timer just called Nerd Overhead. Say, for instance, there's an Apple keynote, and I'm going to watch the keynote. It's an hour and a half. Where do I put that? I'm going to talk about that on 2 different podcasts. I'm going to write about it. It's like, where does it go? Does it go in Connected? Does it go in MPU? Or does it go in 512 Pixels? Well, it goes in Nerd Overhead because it's something that is related to my job that's nerdy, that's not personal time, right? And so even things like when my Mac Studio showed up and I took an afternoon and rewired my desk and moved things around, that's Nerd Overhead, right? It's not a specific show or a specific thing on my website, but it is related to all of that. And I have found that having that as sort of a backstop bucket to put things in has been really helpful. And it's made me worry less about getting the rest of it exactly right, because I do have this thing that, sometimes I just have overhead. I need to track that too.
Yeah, see, a lot of that falls into the research, the MacSparky research for me. Anytime I'm just playing with things, I'm not sure where it's really going, but I feel like it's useful for me to play with it, then that's where I go. We had a listener write in last week. I was bemoaning the lack of infinite canvas apps, and somebody wrote me and said, hey, you need to try Miro, M-I-R-O.
Mm-hmm.
So I spent an hour on it last night, and that got logged in as research. I'm not sure. Not ready to talk about Miro yet, but I mean, just as an example.
Yeah, that's cool.
I really think that this stuff can be helpful. I mean, the data we talk about is helpful, but you don't need to go like all the way down the nerd hole. We're going to get into apps. I mean, this is Mac Power Users. Of course, there's apps for this, but you could also just do it with a piece of paper and a pencil, honestly. And to me, the real value of this is not in the minutes; it's in the hours. Like, at the end of the week or the month, I just want to know generally what the ballpark is. In fact, one of my complaints about the software apps is they're too precise. I don't need to know to the second. Honestly, I'd rather know to like maybe 30-minute increments or 10-minute increments what I was doing. At the end of the month, the only figure I really look at is the hour figure. So you can get kind of hung up with these apps, and using a piece of paper would be fine. But if you do want to use apps, I think there's some benefits to them that I really like. And one of them is that some of these apps have ways to slice and dice it different ways. Like I use tags on my time tracking data, and there's 2 different categories of tags I use. The first one is what I call moving the needle. And moving the needle for me, and we talked about this on the Focus podcast. In fact, if this episode is pushing a button for you, I would recommend you go listen to the Focus podcast. We cover stuff like this all the time. But I feel like moving the needle for me is stuff that moves the needle. It is writing blog posts. It's recording videos for the labs. It's making field guides, making podcasts. It's the stuff that, I ship. And so anytime I spend moving the needle is time that I make progress. And I was finding that I would get to the end of the day and I felt like I worked all day and I didn't make any progress on anything. And that's when I came up with this idea of moving the needle. So now every day I check at the end of the day, well, how much time did you spend moving the needle? Like if I spent the whole day in email and paying bills and doing like admin junk and realized I didn't move the needle at all, then that's a warning sign to me. So I actually have a tag in my time tracking called moving the needle. And that gives me an easy way to see how I'm doing. And then the other set I use is maker, manager, consumer. And I'm sure somebody wrote a book on this. I'm not sure who wrote it. I haven't read the book, but I heard about it, somewhere, and it really landed with me. It's like you spend time making things, you spend time managing. Even if you're self-employed, you have to decide what you're going to do. You have a manager hat you wear, and I talked about that in my quarterly retreat stuff. And then you have time consuming. And consuming is important too, whether it's just downtime. I've been watching Dickinson with my wife or watching videos about how people use Miro. That's consuming. But anything I do can be broken down into categories of being a maker, a manager, a consumer. And I do my time tracking categories linked to that. And that's another data point I like to see is how much time did I spend making? Because I'm doing my best and feeling my best when I spend the majority of my time making as opposed to consuming or managing. This episode of the Mac Power Users is brought to you by 1Password, the solution Stephen and I use to store and secure our passwords. There's no question that the internet is full of crooks and people looking for ways to break into your data, your bank accounts, your personal information. You need someone fighting at your side, and that is for us 1Password. 1Password is the one solution to solve all of your password needs. With 1Password, you just have to remember your one password, and it takes care of the rest for you. It makes up safe, unique, and secure passwords for every website you sign on to. And 1Password keeps track of those websites for you. If they get hacked, 1Password will let you know, and you can go in and change your password or dissociate your account. But that's just the beginning with 1Password. There's a whole host of features they've got in there because it's an application made by a whole company of people that are concerned about nothing more than your security. They've got versions for your workplace or your family. I'm a family subscriber, but I've heard from a bunch of listeners that are now using 1Password in their workplace. In fact, if you use 1Password at your workplace, you also get 1Password for your family for free. Another thing 1Password does is they keep their users up to date on important information related to security. I go over to the 1password.com/blog and subscribe. They recently did a whole article on the basics of home Wi-Fi security. I forwarded it to a bunch of family members. It's got good basic information in there about default names of your network and turning on Wi-Fi encryption and how to keep your wire up to date and use a firewall. These are basic things, but for so many of the people in our lives, they don't do any of this stuff. So I shared this article to a bunch of family and friends, hopefully helping them a little bit more secure. And I think that's the real theme with 1Password. They make it easy to be secure no matter how technical you are or lack of technical. I've got family members and friends that use 1Password that do not listen to Mac Power Users and have no interest in nerdy stuff like that, but they are able to keep themselves safe and secure with 1Password. So go check it out. Go to 1password.com/MPU. Put that MPU in all caps. That gets you to the 20% discount. Let them know you heard about it here on the Mac Power Users and start protecting yourself and your family today. Thanks 1Password for all of your support of the Mac Power Users.
So let's get started and talk about some of the apps that can make this possible. And we wanted to start with Timing, which is this really cool and powerful Mac app that I know you've used for quite a while, I believe.
Yeah, I've been using it for years. Timing is the premier time tracking app on the Mac. If you work primarily on the Mac, this is one you should check out. You can get it from them directly, or you can get it as part of your SetApp subscription. But I'm a huge fan of the app. And full disclosure, I did videos for him, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago. He needed some product videos, so I shot some videos for him. And I think he sponsored MacSparky a couple of years ago. But
yeah, Relay FM as well.
Oh, okay. I knew I'd done some sponsorship with it. I just can't remember where it was. But either way, this is one of those apps made by a single developer who's super passionate about it, which are, if you've been listening to the show for any length of time, you know it's my favorite kind of app. And Timing is a time tracking app that solves the problem of switch throwing. I mean, in the next segment, we're going to talk about Toggl and Timery, which is a great option as well. But with those, you need to push a button anytime you start doing things. And with Timing, it just pays attention because it's on your Mac. It's a local app. It sees what you're doing. And like a good example is, when I was wearing my law hat and I would work on a contract for a client and I'd lose track of how much time I spent on it. Well, I could go in Timing and say, how much time did I spend with the Microsoft Word with the Smith document on my screen, as my primary window, and it'll tell me. Or if I spent a lot of time writing the blog, I can say, show me how much time I was in the MacSparky admin panel for my blog. It actually tracks not only what app you're in, but what you're doing in the apps. And it sounds creepy, but it's not, because everything's local. Although there's a cloud component if you want to share data, but I just use it locally. And it gives you extremely precise data about how you're using your Mac. And that is, to me, the biggest value proposition for Timing is you have rock solid data coming out of that.
Yeah, what I like about Timing is that it gives all this information to you automatically. If you're running something like Timery, which we're going to talk about in the next section, it's up to you or automation that you set to start and stop timers. And Timing, being able to run in the background and see what's going on, can build this collection of things that you've spent your time on. And then you go into Timing and you can categorize all of those things. So if I'm on the MPU forums, it can count that time against my MPU project. Or if I'm in our CMS in the browser, that can count against my Relay administrative time. It's like a totally different mindset to manually starting and stopping timers.
Yeah, I found this guy who cuts Japanese wood joints by hand. And I swear it's my ASMR.
ASMR, yeah.
Right? That's my ASMR, man.
ASMR.
Watching that guy cut those joints. And I was doing my, I lost the thread with my time tracking last week one day, and I had to go recreate it, right? Because I wasn't throwing timers. So I went into Timer, and I'm like, oh, I know that from like 2 to like 4, I was doing a bunch of research and admin for MacSparky, and I was going to log it. I said, let me check that in Timing. And in Timing, I realized I spent half of that time, a whole hour, watching his videos, because Timing doesn't lie, right? It's like the cold water in your face. So I had to track that time as, downtime, basically, because that's what I was doing. And that's the kind of stuff that time tracking helps you with. It's like, oh, I see that. Sometimes in the afternoon, I get tired and I go off and go on adventures on the internet. Well, there's nothing wrong with that if that's what I intended to do, but it was actually during time that I intended to work. So maybe instead of doing that in the future, I should go out in the garage and cut a Japanese joint, and like just treat it as downtime and do something fun and make something rather than sit here and watch videos. But that's the kind of data you get out of it. And Timing, as opposed to some of the other solutions, just doesn't lie. It just gives you the cold hard facts. And if you use your Mac a lot, I think it's a critical tool for this. And it's a zero input from you. You just turn the app on and it does everything in the background for you.
What about when you're away from your Mac? If you're a person who is getting trackable time done on your iPhone or iPad?
Yeah, so Timing now has a web component you can plug into, and they have shortcuts. Like I built out a whole set of shortcuts. I should share them at some point to track time and timing with shortcuts. So you can do it. It's got a URL callback scheme. It's not super easy, but it's not super difficult either to set that up. It also has the ability, like when you return to your Mac, say, hey, you've been gone for an hour. What were you doing? Another thing Timing does that I really like is it can integrate with your calendar. So it'll show you what your calendar appointments are for the day. And since I block schedule, I can see my blocks against my timing data, which is really helpful because then you can see, well, look, I had planned to do, email communications for this hour, and I spent the hour watching YouTube, or no, I actually did spend the hour in email, dealing with email. And so that, I was on target for that hour. So it just got a lot of nice features. It syncs between multiple Macs if you have multiple Macs. They have added a new feature where you can use it on Teams, but it's the most non-creepy time tracking for Teams, where they your supervisor, there's a whole bunch of data that they pull out that your supervisor can't see. But I've never used that, but I know that's like a recent feature they had. It's got the ability to auto categorize for you. So it will go through, and if you start kind of training it, what does it mean when I spend time on the Mac Power Users, admin website? Well, that means it's a Mac Power Users time. So then in the future, it will automatically log it to that project for you. It starts to, get smarter as you use it. Again, I use the same categories for timing that I do with the list I'm sharing in Toggl and Timery that we're going to talk about later. So I kind of treat these as overlapping applications. But to me, timing's real benefit is, getting absolute track of what I did on my Mac. Now, if you don't spend a lot of time on your Mac, I think that's a harder sell, because, then you've got to go through and manually add those entries. Like if you're someone who just works on the iPad, I wouldn't recommend timing. But if you spend your time on your Mac, this is one you should check out.
I particularly like that it has that rule engine in it. If you look through the Timing app website, there's this whole page about these rules where you can tell it, hey, these certain things track these certain ways. And you go into it, and it's like this rule editor is incredibly powerful. You can really get super fine-grained with what things are tracked to certain things, like including if you're using Mail.app, can I categorize all time spent reading emails from a particular address? That's sort of how specific you can get in this. And it's just really impressive how far down the stack timing can reach to build this data set for you.
Because I primarily work on my Mac, I have ran experiments where I did all my time tracking and timing and didn't use Toggl and Timery, which are, I think, the most popular ones in our kind of little world. And it worked fine for me. I use both, and the reason I do both is because I actually make my living talking about this stuff, and I want to be kind of familiar with everything. But if I were just doing this on my own, if I was, back to being a lawyer without a podcast, I would probably do it all in Timery. I'm sorry, in timing. It's hard. You mix these up so easily. The names are so close. But because I work so much on my Mac and the data is so accurate, and it's really easy at the end of the day to just go drag your mouse and categorize anything you missed. I'm a big fan of timing. But honestly, I'm a big fan of Timery and Toggl too. I think that, right now we have an abundance of riches here.
Yeah. And this is the sort of application that is so well suited for the Mac, right? This sort of monitoring of what's going on is just not possible on iOS and iPadOS. And so timing is just this Mac app, but it in using it, and I ran it for the last week or so in preparation for this episode. Like it's such a good example of what a good Mac app can do. And that was kind of fun. It was kind of fun to be in this app that like really is plugged into what's going on in macOS in a way that a lot of even other Mac apps, quite frankly, don't do that good of a job of. And it's very impressive. It's very impressive that it's from one person. And I agree with you. Like, I think if you're, just looking to track time on your own and you do your work on a Mac, this is a fantastic place to get started because of its built-in automatic tracking. You don't have to remember to start and stop things like we said. And I think that really is a strong suit, and it makes it unique amongst all of these other products.
A couple of the things about it is the reporting is excellent. I mean, in terms of breaking down your data to show you what it is, it does a fantastic job of that, giving you statistics and reporting on your actual time tracking data. I mean, because the point of time tracking isn't time tracking. The point is to, get the data out the back end, like we talked about at the top of the show today, and make changes or observe trends. And the reporting in this application is excellent. It does another thing where it like tries to give you a productivity score, like a percentage productivity score. And there's like sliders for each category of project. Like if something really moves the needle, you can make it 100%. And if it doesn't, you make it, 10% or whatever. I don't use any of that stuff. I just find the attempt to quantify this as some overall measure of productivity doesn't jive with me. That just becomes kind of a game thing. For me, the main thing out of this is just getting those reports to find out where I spent my time, and then acting on that. But yeah, I think Timery is an excellent application, and for a lot of people, the beginning and ending of this journey because of those automatic timers. I just can't emphasize how easy. And when I run the experiments of running this as my only timing application, it works fine. The workflow is you let it run all day. You don't think about it. And then as part of my end of the day shutdown, I check my data for the day. And what Timery does, dang, I did it again. Timing does. What timing does is it looks at what you're doing, like what email boxes you were in or what web pages you were on, and it assigns those to specific projects that you have set up. And you train those rules over time to get better and better at that. But sometimes you get to the end of the day and you'll see that, hey, there was an hour you spent. Quite often for me, it's an hour I spent not working, where I like wandered off into the internet somewhere. And it's like, I don't know what to do with this. And then you assign it. Like I actually have a category called unintentional time. And it's where I went down, the Japanese joinery. And then so at the end of the week, I say, wow, I spent like 4 hours this week doing things that I didn't plan to do. Well, that's not good. How am I going to get better at that? So I assign that to an intentional or shopping or whatever. And so you can fix that at the end of the day right in the app. But that process, honestly, is probably easier than it is with Timery, because these other ones, you've got to fiddle with time dials and things.
Right.
We're going to talk about that in the next segment. But, just for kind of a bare bones, solid time tracking app, if you spend like an hour setting up timing to get the right project categories in, spend a little bit of time at the end of each day babysitting that data to make sure you kind of get it in the ballpark, you're going to get the benefit of time tracking with the very minimal investment of time. Man, I'm talking myself into just going back to timing full time now.
That's okay. I mean, like you said, there's a wealth of options here, and that's one reason I think the tools are one reason people are exploring this and to such great effect, because doing this with a clock and a sheet of paper, you could totally do that, but because a lot of folks out there are like us and we like exploring software and seeing what's possible, like it's totally cool to change your mind about what app you want to use. I can't cast a stone.
Yeah. None of us can. Mm-mm. None of us can.
This episode of MPU is made possible by TextExpander. Get your team communicating faster so they can focus on what's most important. With TextExpander, your team's knowledge is always at their fingertips. Get the whole team on the same page by getting information out of silos and into the hands of everyone that needs to use it. You can share your team's knowledge across departments so your team is sending a unified message to your customers and they're not spending time reinventing the wheel. Here's how it works. First, you store it. Keep your company's most used emails, phrases, messaging, URLs, and more right within TextExpander. Then you share it. Get your whole team access to the content they need to use every day, organize it by department, and then expand it. Deploy the content you need with just a few keystrokes on any device across any apps your team is using. It's really that easy. TextExpander is available for Mac, Windows, Chrome, iPhone, and iPad. Show listeners get 20% off their first year. Go to textexpander.com/MPU to learn more and sign up.
So let's talk about Timery and Toggl. That's the one that everybody is using these days.
Yeah, it's definitely popular. Let's start on the Toggl end of things. So Toggl is a free-ish web service for time tracking. And Timery is one of a couple of different apps that are built using Toggle's API. So you can just sign up on Toggle's website, track with their app, which on the Mac is real bad, or track on the website. But Timery kind of gives you a more modern UI on top of it, and I think honestly for most people with Toggle, you can get by with the free tier. I mean, I don't think I'm paying for Toggle. Or do you know if you are?
Like about 4 years ago, I bought a year of it thinking, well, let's see how much more I can get out of this. And I found I was still using the exact same features, even with the other ones opening up. So I turned it off. I only paid for 1 year, and I'm fine with the free tier.
Yeah, I'm on the free tier as well.
Yeah. But so Toggle it's just a web service where you can go on the web and push a button and start a timer. And you can set timers in Toggle of kind of by project and subtask in them. This is under the free tier. They also have a tagging mechanism, which is, I talked about earlier how I use tags. So I've got those installed on my Toggle timers. And they've also got like at the paid tiers, you can go deeper down the stack where, like if you're a consultant and you charge by the hour, you can get, billing reports and more depth in your timers out of it. But the thing about Toggle that made it such a big win was they have a very open API. So, and they have an app. I mean, Toggle has a free app you can get for your phone, and it's okay. I don't really want to disparage it. You can run Toggle timers on your iPhone just fine with the Toggle app, but it's never been great. And then we've got this app called Timery, which was made by another single developer. In fact, I met the guy when we had the Automators meetup up at the last Living WWDC, and it's again a single person, super dedicated to making like the best possible time tracking app, and he's using Toggle as like the back end for actually running the timers and holding the data, but he rewrote the whole front end. And Timery has evolved. I mean, it started out as an iPhone and iPad app, but then it came over to the Mac with Catalyst. It's probably the best Catalyst app. I mean, we can get into the details later, but I mean, he's tied into every possible feature that Toggle has and put as much of that as possible in the application.
I also give Timery bonus points that the example screenshots on the website are all from Parks and Recreation, and I, as a Parks and Rec fan, enjoy the humor there.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I've had experiences with the developers of both of these applications, and you can feel good about spending money on Timery or timing.
100%.
You're helping like nice people who are trying to make a good thing to help people out. I mean, it's like in both cases, Pawnee Journal, I see here.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah. Waffle at JJ's an hour and a half. Yeah, these apps are both just great examples of people who are, indie developers who are making really good stuff for Apple platforms, and we need more people like that. So it's definitely encouraging to see the competition in this space.
With Timery, it relies on Toggle for the back end, and I don't know what the costs would be involved. Ultimately, I would like to see Timery become independent of Toggle. Giving all my time tracking data. I don't know anything about the Toggle company. I know they've got multiple products, and maybe they're cool. I don't know, but I always feel a little weird knowing that my data is going to somebody's server somewhere about my time tracking. And it's not that there's anything that detailed in it. I mean, you'll know how much time I spent working on a field guide or making a podcast, but that I would prefer that we had the indie developer own the data as well. But the thing about Toggle is it is such a class act in terms of an iOS app. I mean, we'll get to the Mac in a second, but just in general, there was nothing like it on. I tried a lot of time tracking apps over the years, and I've never seen any as good as Timery for the iPhone. I mean, like one of the things I love about Timery is he has these amazing widgets, and like on my, in fact, when we get into today's more power users, I've got the large size Timery widget on my iPad, which is below my Mac. So I can tell you, as I'm sitting here today, I've spent an hour and 41 minutes on podcasts, an hour and 30 minutes on Mac Sparky, and 20 minutes taking care of the dog and taking a shower. And that's just in front of me at all times because he's made a widget that just drops it right there for me.
Mm-hmm.
Or like when you're creating a new entry in Timery, if you forget to set a timer, but you stopped your last timer, if you just long press on the start time, it automatically fills in the time from the last end time, which is the thing you run into when you set timers. You're like, oh, I stopped doing email at 8:00 and now it's 8:45, but I want to, log the last 45 minutes. You just long press on the start time and it automatically sets it back to 8:00, There are so many little features like that in this app, and when he was going through the beta for the Mac, I would send him emails and he would like add a feature for me just to make it easier.
Yeah, it's really well laid out, and it is a very modern iOS app in terms of all of those features. But I think also just in terms of look and of customization, where you can do the stuff like you'd imagine. You can change the theme color on the iOS app. You can change the app icon. Sort of all those little touches that make a iOS app feel nice and modern and fresh. They're all there. And again, from a single developer who I think he really understands like how people are using his application. And I think that's nice. I've definitely had interactions with developers or with companies in the past, and you come walking away from a support email or something like, I'm not sure you get what I expect out of your app, right? And that's not the case with this. And I think as it has improved and features have been added over the last couple of years, it's only gotten better and better. You mentioned the Mac app being Catalyst, and I really wanted to highlight that because there are people in sort of the larger Mac community who would say, well, that's not a real Mac app. I heard it on a podcast 2 days ago. Like, oh, it's not a real Mac app. Like, yes, like Catalyst is a first-party solution for building apps on the Mac. And if you didn't know Timery was Catalyst, it's kind of like Craft. I think Craft is the other example that I use of like a really solid, good Catalyst app. If you didn't know or you weren't told, you wouldn't be able to tell. They've done such a good job at adapting to Mac OS, including like this really rich menu bar application, which my understanding is not easy to do with Catalyst, or it may not even be possible out of the box with Catalyst the way that it's been implemented here. But, it runs on my Mac all day, every day, and it feels and looks great. And I never think about, it came from this other platform. Like all that stuff's silly to me. It's really solid wherever you use it at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, it's a Catalyst app, but he made it for the Mac. I mean, it has Mac keyboard shortcuts. You like that trick I was telling you about earlier where you long press the start time and it automatically resets it to the last end time? On the Mac, it's Option L. You just hit Option L and it does it for you. And like it's got a massive number of keyboard shortcuts to allow you to create new entries, adjust start times and end times and all that stuff. You can make it very, very quickly. You can, work with this stuff. And these are features that are not on the iPhone because they wouldn't make sense there. But he added a whole feature set to support the Mac when he brought it over. And that's the kind of, that's just the kind of developer I love. And that's the reason why I'm running 2 time trackers because they're both good. The other thing, we haven't mentioned it yet. We're going to give a whole segment to automation later, but Timery is a first-class automation player. I mean, there are so many ways, like shortcuts, Keyboard Maestro, whatever you want to do, you can automate Timery with it. And I want to get into that, but we'll save that for the next segment. Just the mechanics of using Timery are, number one, it syncs with your Toggle database. So if you've set up like timers and Toggle, it'll automatically show up there. What I really do with Timery is I set saved timers. And I think that's what you've done too, looking at your screenshot. And so saved timers for me are the magic here, because if you name a timer something a little different every time, then Toggle gets confused about, what it is. Like if I just say, shortcuts and then like shortcuts with a lowercase s, it's going to track those as separate time entries. So I picked kind of like the entries that are important to me Like I have one called a category called Field Guides, and one of that called Shortcuts for Mac. And any time entry I put into, or any time I put into that, I want to categorize that. So having it as a saved timer allows me to consistently always use the same names. And then Timery like really picks up on that, and it puts those saved timers in front of your face as often as you can.
Yeah, I actually don't have any timers that are outside of my saved timer list, except for a couple that I have retired. So I had one that was called Pod Cabin because when I was moving in here and setting things up, I was spending a lot of time just on the studio itself, like as a project.
Yeah.
And I still want to keep that timer because I want the historic data tied to it, but I dropped it out of the saved timers list. So it's still there and I can still activate it if I want it, but it's not in my list that I'm looking at every day. And that can be something that folds in really nicely with this idea that I really believe in, that your timers should change over time as you take on new responsibilities and shed old responsibilities. The save timer is like a great way to filter, okay, these are the things that are important to me in this season. And over time, that's going to change.
Totally. And a little aside, I have named my new studio.
Ooh, okay. Let's hear it.
Indoor Studios.
Oh, that's good. Like the forest moon of Endor. Is Endor a planet or a moon? It's a moon, right?
It's a moon.
It's a moon.
And I already have artwork for it.
Wow. You're going all in. Yeah, you haven't started the building, but you got the name. I appreciate the dedication.
I know. What happens if the city doesn't approve it and I can't build it after I have a poster for it? I mean, what happens?
This is the saddest poster in your house.
Yeah, so there's an artist. I'm going to put a picture of this in the show notes. There's an artist who made this really gorgeous, I think they called it like sci-fi travel posters. And she, Danielle Sylvan is the artist name, and she made me a custom one for Indoor Studios. It's a version of another poster she makes, but I'm going to have that hanging in there. So I am going to be very sad if I can't actually hang this on the wall at some point. But yeah,
this
Indoor
is
Studios.
beautiful. This is beautiful. I love it.
Yeah. But either way, you've inspired me because I've probably put a lot of hours in this that I've just logged as MacSparky admin. I need to categorize that. So I'll put a save timer in for it. And that's the trick. With Timery, you create save timers, and Timery is really smart. If you start to create a new timer and you just type a couple characters of it, like if I type EN for Indoor Studios, it's going to find it for me right away and fill it in, and I can kick it off when I spend time on the studio.
There you go.
But that's the workflow, really, is you create these save timers and then you go through them. And manually, they're pretty easy to set. Like, there was at one point where I had made these nested shortcuts where I would kick off, because you can start them with a shortcut, and I would have a menu list to say, okay, is this going to be a personal or a MacSparky or whatever? And then, you would kind of work through the menu system to get to the timer you wanted to start, and it would automatically kick it off. And this was early in the days of Timery when, I was just kind of drunk with its automation potential. But over time, I realized the app is so efficient at starting and stopping timers, especially if you use save timers, that there's no need to run like automation for that kind of stuff. You just go to the list of saved timers, type in a character or swipe down and push a button, and you're good to go.
Yeah.
Another thing about Timery, and this is to contrast with timing, it isn't automatic. You've got to hit those timers. We're going to talk about ways to automatically trigger it, but it doesn't have that kind of built-in nature that timing does of just always watching and knowing when to start and stop things. There is a benefit to forcing you to throw a switch, though. I do find that if I'm having a good day and staying focused on the things I'm supposed to stay focused, actually get kind of a benefit out of going into the timing application or the Timery application and, changing to a new timer. It's almost like a ritual to say, okay, brain, now I want you to turn off Mac Power Users mode and turn on, research mode or whatever it is that I'm switching to. And it's kind of like a little bit of a ritual to change gears into something else. I even do it often after we do a recording session. It's a 2-hour session. I'll take the dog into the backyard and pull some weeds or something, and throwing the timer before I go into the backyard is another thing to say, okay, you can let go of that recording you were just doing and now, focus on something else. And yeah. I think there's something to that.
I think there is too. For me, it's like a reminder to myself, like I'm going to try to the best of my ability for this to be like a focused, 30-minute block on whatever is in front of me. And I have found that needing to go start and stop a timer has helped my mind and helped me like become more focused on the task at hand. And if I'm working, say, on MPU show prep and a Relay membership email comes in, well, I'm in MPU mode right now. I want to keep that going, and the membership thing can wait a little while. And I've found that to be way more useful than I thought it would be. I tend to work in a way where I will jump around between things or even have kind of several things going on, switching between them pretty quickly. And time tracking has forced me in a way that I found to be really helpful to slow some of that down and to really have time like, okay, like I'm spending, this timer is running, I'm spending my energy and time and focus on the task at hand that I've told Timery I'm doing. And it's been surprisingly useful for me. And I don't think I would have anticipated that at the beginning when I sort of restarted this at the beginning of the year, but it's definitely been the case.
Yeah, agreed. And to that note, one of the nice things Timery does is you can enable it to put the currently running timer in your menu bar.
Yes.
And I have that turned on. And I like it. And, having it up there, seeing it like, oh, okay, that's what I should be focused on right now. So if I'm looking at, YouTubes of other things, and then I look up and say, oh, wait a second, I'm running a timer for a podcast right now. Well, maybe I should be working on the podcast. So I do find that of some benefit.
Yeah. You mentioned the reporting in timing, and Timery has that as well. There's an overview section where it just gives you, and you can put these things as widgets, but you can kind of see like today, this week, where things are, and you can filter that by, because I just use projects, I don't use tags, so I have mine set up by projects, and so I can see that this week it's Tuesday around lunchtime for me. The thing I've spent the most time on this week is MPU, and then after that is a project I call 512 videos. I'm working on a video to come out next week, and then it kind of goes down from there. And having that reporting, and then there's like a summary report where you can really dive in and like compare week to week kind of where things are. I find that to be really useful information, and I don't have to go out to Toggle's website to do it. And Toggle has its own reporting, and some of them are good and some of them aren't so good. But honestly, I found that my needs are met with what has been built into Timery itself using that data.
Yeah, I mean, this is a relatively new feature. When the app first shipped, it didn't have this reporting in it, and you'd have to go to Toggle to get your reports. And I think that, again, this is just another example of him doing an excellent job and getting you exactly what you need. You can set the reporting criteria, like because I use those tags about moving the needle and maker, manager, consumer, I can get reports customized to that, or just an overall report by the week, by the month, whatever. I've not gone back to Toggle since. And a lot of times what I'll do is when I'm doing my monthly review, I'll just take a screenshot of this and put it in day one, just so I can see how I did this month.
Yeah, I think that's cool. It is surprisingly useful to go back and see what you actually recorded.
Yeah. And over time too. I mean, if you look back and say, well, what did I do last year at this time? And what was, sometimes you see trends over time, when you start collecting the data.
Mm-hmm.
This episode of the Mac Power Users is brought to you by Indeed. Go to Indeed.com/MPU to get a free $75 credit to upgrade your job post. Hunting down answers to your questions can be rewarding, but when it comes to hiring, you don't always have as much time as you'd like to spend finding great candidates with the right skills. That's why there's Indeed, the best hiring partner your team can get. If you're hiring, you need Indeed, because Indeed is the hiring partner where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. And Indeed is the only job site where you're guaranteed to find quality applications that meet your must-have requirements or you don't pay. Instead of spending hours on multiple job sites hoping to find candidates with the right skills, you need one powerful hiring partner that can help you do it all. Indeed partners with you on every step of the hiring process. You can find great talent through time-saving tools like Indeed Instant Match, assessments, and virtual interviews. With Instant Match, as soon as you sponsor a post, you get a short list of quality candidates with resumes on Indeed that match your job description, and you can invite them to apply right away. Plus, you only pay for quality applications that meet your must-have requirements. With Indeed, you'll be in good company. You can join more than 3 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. And this is pretty cool. With Instant Match, over 90% of employers get quality candidates as soon as they sponsor their job post, according to Indeed data. So start hiring right now with a free $75 sponsored job credit to upgrade your job post at Indeed.com/MPU. This offer is valid through April 30. Go to Indeed.com/MPU to claim your $75 credit before April 30. Once again, Indeed.com/MPU, and terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. Our thanks to Indeed for their support of the Mac Power users and all of Relay FM.
So we've talked a little bit about how we automate these tools, especially I think with Timery, where you're starting and stopping timers sort of manually. Being able to apply some automation to that can be really useful. And I'm curious, let's start with you and see how you're exploring this.
Yeah. Just to cover real quick, timing, the Mac app we talked about, most of the automation I do with that is in the application. We kind of covered it in that segment, but the app gets smarter over time and automatically assigns projects. And once you nail that down, there really isn't a lot of further need for automation. You don't really need kind of outside influence on it, but you can call into the app and set timers via automation there. They also have a URL scheme method to set timers on your phone or your mobile devices, and they've got a whole page on it on their website. We'll put a link in the show notes if you're interested about that. And if you get hung up on it, let me know. I've actually done some of that, so I've got some sample ones. Maybe at some point I'll share that on the website. But so you can automate with timing, although I found you don't need it as much because the app is basically already doing everything for you. You don't need it to automatically track when you start working on a Word document because it's already doing that, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Now, over on the Timery and Toggle side, this is where you need to throw the manual switches, and maybe that's what you want to do. Stephen and I talked about that. But you can also have it automatically trigger start and stops of these automations on various automation schemes. And what really makes this sing is Timery's like full embrace of shortcuts. I'm a big fan of a lot of different automation methods. I talk about Keyboard Maestro, I think, every episode of Mac Power Users, but there are things where I think shortcuts is better. And one of them is this type of automation where I wanted to go into an app and throw a switch. And Timery does that so well.
Yeah, the shortcut support in this app is wild. I actually have shortcuts open now and just looking through the various things you can do. Of course, you have what you would imagine, right? Start and stop timers, right? Like that's the.
Well, let me interrupt there for a second because that's what you need 99% of the time anyway.
It is.
But so just to put a point on it, you can create a single step shortcut that says go into Timery and start my research timer in the MacSparky category and set the tag to moving the needle and maker. I can do all that with one action in shortcuts. And the beauty of that is now you've saved that action. You can use it elsewhere. Like, let's say I want to create a focus mode about research and say, trigger the research focus mode and open up, Obsidian and this website and set the research timer on in Timery. So you can have it be one of many things you do where it automatically starts a timer as in addition to the other stuff you're doing. So, I mean, that's how I use it a lot.
Yeah, me too. And my start timer shortcut is literally one action. And I told the action, give me a list of my projects and let me start the timer, whichever one I select. And the end timer, again, just one action. It can really be that simple. But what that gives you is the ability to tie it to things like the Stream Deck if you're on the Mac. So I've got side by side, I have the Timery logo in green and in red. And the green one hits that start timer shortcut. So I get a window and I select whichever project I want. And then I hit OK. And now it's tracking that. And I can end a timer from anywhere with just the push of that red button. And honestly, that's how I interface with Timery the most on the Mac, given all the keyboard shortcuts, the Mac menu bar app, everything. Most of the time, I'm just doing it in shortcuts through the Stream Deck, and it's fast, and I can just do it. I don't have to mode switch if I've started something. I don't have to go find the Timery app. It's just a physical button on my desk, and it's pretty cool. I really enjoy it. And like I said, that's the primary method in which I interact with the app these days.
Yep. And I interrupted you because there are a ton of shortcuts actions in addition to that one that we use so often.
Oh yeah. I mean, you can really build some pretty complex things. You have actions for checking the time tracked for a timer or a project. So you can see your data that you've already logged. You can add or update time entries, which you can do in the UI of Timery. You mentioned earlier, it's like, I meant to start one a while back, or sometimes I'll start one, I just need to add 5 minutes to it in the past. Like I can go do that in the UI, or I can do it from shortcuts. And then it has a lot of tools for integrating in broader shortcuts. So like get a list of your projects, get a list of your clients or of your tags, and then you can select those and make other things happen as you go. It's really well thought out. I mean, there's probably 24 actions in here at least, and there's not really anything that I find myself wanting from Timery shortcut integration that it doesn't already have.
And then one of the nice things with shortcuts is they've got so many great mobile app triggers now that these can become a component of that. Like there is a trigger like when you launch an app. So anytime I launch OmniFocus, it kicks off the MacSparky planning timer.
Mm-hmm.
It just says, okay, if he launches OmniFocus, he's going to be doing planning. He's most likely planning for MacSparky. Just start that timer. And then that way I don't have to remember to set the timer. And, you can make it when apps quit. I mean, there's a bunch of ways you can do this, but I really like the idea of, doing setups. I mean, that's a big thing for me. Creating a setup, like I'm going to process email. So open up on my Mac, email on one side and the task manager and the calendar. And by the way, because Timery supports shortcuts on the Mac now too, start off the comms timer, and so anything I do on my computer to simplify getting into a work mode now has a kickoff a timer action in it as well.
Yeah. And because it's in shortcuts for iOS and iPadOS, you can do all of that over there as well. So I don't have it set up anymore, but when I sat on the old side of my studio, I had a little NFC tag on my desk that would put the studio sort of into what I called like podcast mode. So the overlay headlights would be off, the desk lamp would be dimmed, and it would like put my phone in do not disturb. It had several actions like, okay, now I am recording a podcast. And the very last action on that chain was pick a timer. And so I could pick the show that I was getting ready to record. It really can be like that easy to integrate time tracking with stuff you've already automated. And I think that's really, for me at least, like the real power of this is that, yes, you can use these shortcut integrations as standalone actions. And again, that's how we do it most of the time. That's most of what most people need. But if you have these other workflows you've built into shortcuts, adding Timery support to them is very often just one additional action, maybe two. And then you've like baked time tracking into what you're already doing.
Okay, I want to do a show on this because you do setups and I do setups. We need to do a whole show on how we do setups. You know what I'm talking about when I say that?
Like putting our workspace into certain modes, that sort of thing.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And if anybody out there listening has cool ones you want to share, send us a note. But or put it in the forum for this show. But we're going to do a setup show because I have so much to talk about on this stuff, and I just realized I need to get it out of my system. So we're going to do that. Adding it to the outline right now. But yeah, but if you do setups, time tracking is a very easy thing to add on to it. And with timing app, it will do it automatically because it's going to track what app you're in. With Timery, you can use the shortcuts integration to kick it off when you start the setup. And either one of those is a zero input method for me. You don't need to do anything. It just happens and you get the accurate data out the back end. So it's it's very useful.
Mm-hmm. I did want to point out a cool shortcut that our friend John Voorhees put together on Mac Stories last week. One thing you run into with time tracking manually is sometimes you'll forget to end a timer. And Toggle has an option if you go to their website and log in to send you an email if a timer has been running for more than 8 hours. And so the example that always gets me is, say that the end of the day I'm doing relay admin work, and then it's my work day is over. I go inside, I'm having dinner, put the kids to bed, whatever, and I've just forgotten to turn off that timer. Well, at some point overnight, I'll get an email, and then when I get up, I can fix that in Timery. John has put together this really cool shortcut that basically recreates that, but on just running on your Mac, so you don't have to rely on Toggle for it, and it gives you options. So say that you want a reminder on your Mac if a timer is running for more than 2 hours. Say that 8 hours is too long for whatever reason. You can customize this one. And the way he did it is super clever. I'll leave it in the show notes. You can go check it out. But if that's something you've kind of run into in your own time tracking, this may be a neat way to curtail it.
So I do something similar. I have a time-based shortcut, because on the phone you can have shortcuts that run at a specific time, and it runs daily. And every day at 23:30 or 11:30 p.m., it stops the current time entry.
Oh, that's good.
And then, so just every day it stops. And usually I'm asleep by 11:30, but it's very rare I'm up past that hour.
Yeah.
And so then if I get up the next day and I'm like, oh, look, the timer went to 11:30, I can just back it off to whenever I fell asleep. But that's the trick I use.
Yeah, that's cool.
And that's, the beauty of Timery is the shortcuts integration. I mean, it's a great app, but when you take it and you add shortcuts, and now that shortcuts is on the Mac too, it really kind of brings it to a new level. I looked with the show coming up, I downloaded a bunch of alternate, time tracking apps on the iPhone. And honestly, none of them are worth talking about here.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think between these two apps, kind of no matter how you want to work, you can be covered. And I think Timery being on all of them, and Joe, the developer, has said it's coming on the Apple Watch. He had a tweet thread recently about some of the things he was exploring there. Like, it can be with you everywhere. It can integrate any way that you're automating your work. It's really hard to find a complaint about this app. And it's a subscription, and I'm happy to pay it because it gives me all of these features and it gets better and better over time. But yeah, the shortcut stuff in particular, it's just so well thought through. That's really what I had in mind when I said that this is built by somebody who understands how people are using his app. Like, adding robust shortcut support to me is a great example of how a developer sees their user base. There's third-party apps on my Mac right now that I'm looking at some of their shortcut stuff, and it's so basic and not at all what I would want to have. And having this long list of things, like, it really shows that when a developer listens to their user base and takes feedback, and not just from people like you and me, right, who have podcasts about this stuff, but from regular users who are just trying to get their stuff done. And that makes me happy to support an application like this with a subscription.
You know what we need, though? something both timing and timer could both massively benefit from is we need Apple to open up screen time data to third-party applications. Yeah, I mean, if you turn screen time on your Mac, I mean, both of these apps are kind of like going for what screen time is supposed to do, but doesn't do very well. But, Apple has the ability on, just like, timing can monitor your actual usage on your Mac. It can't do that on iPhone and iPad because Apple won't let it. But Apple is collecting that data. And there's no reason why you shouldn't be able, as a user, to say, I want to selectively allow certain apps to see this data. I mean, they do it with your health data. I mean, I can share all my health data with any number of health apps by just throwing a box, right? I feel like they should have the same user-approved access model for your screen time data, and then Timery and Toggle could grab that data and help you further automate what you're doing on your mobile devices.
Yeah, I think it would be fantastic. As sort of limited and some, especially on the Mac, buggy screen time could be, it is the only way to get some of that data from your mobile device, right? And Apple, I don't think Apple's going to allow something like timing to run on the iPhone, but Apple itself could do that and then hand it off. That's such a good idea, and one that I had not considered. It would be really neat to see Apple embrace that.
Well, the thing that's encouraging is that they've done it with health data. I don't know what could be possibly more, I guess, your finances and your health, but what app you're in, I think is much lower tier than, how many beats per minute your heart is going. But so either way, I don't know, maybe they're not interested, or, I don't know. The screen time is a hard thing to figure out. I can't tell if anybody's even working on it anymore. But maybe we'll find out in June. But it would be cool if these I think about these two developers in particular who are like kind of obsessive about making good user experiences. If you gave them the data, they would find a great way to use it. I'm certain,
100%. This episode of Mac Power Users is brought to you by ZocDoc. No one knows what you're looking for in a doctor better than you, and no one's better at giving you the tools to find the perfect doctor than ZocDoc. The people behind ZocDoc found the major pain points in healthcare and made booking a great doctor surprisingly pain-free. ZocDoc is a free app that shows you doctors who are patient-reviewed, take your insurance, and are available when you need them. You can read up on local doctors with verified patient reviews and see what other real humans had to say about their visits. So when you walk into that doctor's office, you're set up to see someone in your network who gets you. Go to ZocDoc.com, choose a time slot, and whether you want to see the doctor in person or do a video visit, and just like that, you're booked. Find the doctor that's right for you and book an appointment that works for your schedule. Every month, millions of people use ZocDoc. In the chaotic world of healthcare, let ZocDoc be your trusted guide to find a quality doctor. I think especially for people who maybe have moved to a new area or looking for a doctor with different specialty or someone just changing it up, ZocDoc is a great answer to all of those problems. Go to ZocDoc.com/MPU and download the free ZocDoc app for free. That's ZocDoc, ZocDoc.com/MPU. Start your search for a top-rated doctor today. Many are available within 24 hours. Our thanks to ZocDoc for the support of the show and all of Relay FM.
Okay, we've been dancing around the whole episode how we do time tracking, but I thought let's kind of just go through it in detail. What's your workflow?
Yeah, so like I said in the beginning, mine is all project based. I'm not using any tags or subtasks to further categorize things. So I, for my podcast, have MPU, Connected, Ungenius, and Somehow I Manage. I'm not tracking show prep, editing, recording, post-production, right? It's just all in that one big bucket. And for me, that's just how sort of I think about my work. I think about my work in terms of the output. And so it makes sense to me that just anytime I spend doing anything with Mac Power Users, it goes in the Mac Power Users timer. I pretty exclusively time track on my Mac. Part of that is that I don't really work on an iPad actually at all anymore. I've kind of given up on that. And if I'm doing something on my phone, generally it's not more than, oh, there's this link on Twitter or in my RSS reader, and I want to put it in a Google Doc for future use, right? So maybe it goes in the MPU running feedback document that we share, or it goes into the connected outline or the ungeniused outline. I don't track that. It's just a couple of, not even probably even a whole minute, so it's fine. And so most of mine is being done sitting at my Mac Studio. And like I said, most of that is run through the Stream Deck through shortcuts. Being able to stop and select a new timer. I do totally like back your decision to have the menu bar app like visible for Timery. I have mine set where I can see the name of the timer and how long it's been running. And even on my MacBook Pro, I do the same thing. So I can see what I've told Timery I'm working on. And I find that to be really useful. Yeah, I'm not really doing much of this kind of, on the phone or out and about. It's most of the time it's just at my desk. It was most of the time that's where I'm working. And since I don't track non-work time, I don't really have a huge need for it. It's on the home screen of my iPhone, but really on the phone, it's more, if I'm out at a meeting or doing something unusual. But honestly, it could be somewhere else on my iPhone and not be a big deal, probably.
Yeah. For me, I wrote a blog post last year called Time Tracking and Hacking My Brain that you put in the show notes, and I had completely forgot that I wrote. I mean, yeah, it was, still in the middle of COVID. I had a fever dream one day and wrote that post. But
there you go.
But I use a combination, as I've been tipping my hand the whole episode. I really like timing. I like the automatic nature of it where I don't have to think about it. I've done experiments where I ran it exclusively, and I think I could probably get away with that. As I said at the top of the show, I'm not looking to get my time tracking down to the second. I just want general trends. And I like the way timing works. I like the way I can just update at the end of the day. I think it's easier to add project blocks to it than it is with Timery, just kind of the nature of the toggle interface. But so I think I could probably get by with just that if I, wasn't the fact that I kind of make my living talking about this stuff and I want to have experience with all of them. That said, I let timing run, but I also run Timery, and I do find some benefit, the flip side of what I just said. I do find some benefit from throwing those switches. But I have one of the things I do like about Timery is the easy way I can see the data with widgets. We didn't mention it, but they've also got great widgets on the Mac. If you go to the, the 2-finger swipe from the right side, you can enable your Timery widgets there as well. Man, I wish that we could get back to that where we had those widgets just plastered all over the screen of the Mac. But, right now they're in a limited space. Wouldn't that be great if that happened next month, Stephen? We got that.
It'd be great.
But anyway, but what I do is I keep it on my iPad, which is right under my Mac with the big widget. And I find that data is super useful as I go through the day. Helps keep me on track. I primarily use it on the Mac because that's where I do most of my work, but I also use it mobilely. When I get up and, whether I'm just going to play with the dog or if I'm going, over the weekend, I had to suddenly go get my daughter at school. As I got in the car, got the directions in, I threw the timer, for family time. So I'm going to go up and get her and see her. So I can do that mobilely. I don't trigger timers the way all my nerd friends do with a shortcut. I just tap the app. It's just so easy to go into the list of save timers, because my list of save timers is not very big. Scroll to the one I want and tap it, and it just starts. I just don't find that I need that automation for it. Where I use the automation with Timery is in conjunction with other things I do. If I want to, like I said earlier, if I want to set up to do something special, I will run a timer, and I've got little save timers I can run as components of bigger automation. So that's kind of the way I do it. It's a really big deal to me at the end of the day to shut down properly, in my day. And part of that is checking my timing tracking. If I blew it, I can look at my timing data and kind of bring things into sync. It doesn't take that long. I do spend a little bit of time time tracking, and that's another, it's like another thing like I was talking at the beginning. Do you spend your time actually producing or, all the mechanics around producing? But this is another one where I find the limited investment of time I give it be really beneficial because it helps me make big decisions about things that I should stop doing or things where I need to like pay particular attention to changing how they're done. And it makes me feel like making progress on, being my best me. So I find it useful. And I sometimes I'll stop doing it for a while. Like I listen to Mike and Gray. They do on the Cortex podcast every year. They share their big numbers for the whole year. And it doesn't work that way for me. Like, because I'll spend a month just using timing and not timery, or I'll spend a month using timery and not timing. I'll try different, mixes so I can share them to the extent that they're useful. And sometimes I'll say, well, what would happen if I just stopped time tracking? Because I've been doing it for so long.
Yeah.
What I found was I start getting distracted and I start finding holes in the day, and the time tracking really helps keep me on track. That was kind of the point of that blog post I mentioned earlier. So, but I will stop occasionally. Like sometimes we'll go on vacation. I'm not going to like track time when I'm, swimming with turtles in Hawaii or whatever, but so, there are holes in my time tracking data. I'm not too precious about it, but I do find that the process of doing it and the habit of doing it helps keep me more intentional. It gives me a lot more data to work with. A couple of weird things about the way I do it is, again, I don't care about the minutes. So like in the Timery app, you can have it round off to the nearest 10 minutes. And I do that. I don't need it to be that, like I said, I'm just looking for trends. And they also allow you to go by percentage hours. And I've been meaning to write Joe about this for a long time because it's like, is it, 47% of an hour or, because as a lawyer, I used to always do it by percentages anyways. I would like to break that down to like tenths of an hour so that you could just scroll through 10 items, instead of 100. But I really like, I track it by percentage hour. Like I just spent 1.5 hours on this rather than saying from 9 o'clock to 10:30. It's faster to enter it with a percentage. And I have, an increasingly narrow set of saved timers. I shared a set with you, Stephen. Like I was looking here, the DLR, that's that little thing my wife and I have been doing, the Disneyland Resort Field Guide. I've got like 4 entries for that. That just needs to be 1. I need to break that down to just 1. And you just keep, a narrow list of saved timers that make sense to your life. And like Stephen said, be willing to throw them overboard when they're over. Like,
yeah.
If you do a special project, then once the project's over, you don't need to keep it as a saved timer anymore. The data's still there. And my biggest piece of advice is don't be so precious about it. Don't worry about getting it to the second. Just get generally how you're doing. But then the flip side of that is use the data, whether it's weekly or monthly, certainly no less than monthly. Look at it and see how you're doing and see what you learn from it. Because if you don't act on it, then there's no point in it.
Yeah. For me at the end of last year, I ended a couple of podcasts and actually started time tracking, looking back to my data as we've been recording. I actually started time tracking towards the end of last year. I think I got more serious about it in January. But part of that was, well, if I deduct this time, right, that of these shows that are going to go away, then what happens? And it was interesting to see that. But for me, my main outcome for all of this is, okay, I just track work time. All of my projects, bring in money either to Relay or to me directly or both. And I need to keep tabs on that. And so for me, it's a general look at, okay, I'm spending sort of this much time on these things, and I know what each of these things make because I track that as well elsewhere. And are those things in rough alignment? And if they're not, am I okay with that? And sometimes the answer is yes, right? I do plenty of things that don't really help the bottom line of the company or my personal life, personal finances, but I want to do them as part of my job, right? I want to work on certain projects, and I'm lucky enough to have the ability to do so. But it's just a check to make sure that where I think I'm spending my time and what makes sense of the business is what I'm actually doing. And I look at it once a quarter, maybe not even that often. Or if I feel really overwhelmed or I feel like I'm just kind of behind on things, I will look at the data and see what I can glean from that. I'm in the middle of that right now. One of the shows that I ended was Liftoff. It was a show that covered the space industry with our buddy Jason Snell. Well, last week we did 2 episodes. So the show's been on hiatus, and we said we're going to come back just for oddball special episodes. Well, we've done 2. We had Apollo 16, and we caught up on some space news. NASA's building this next generation moon rocket. It's a disaster. They had some bad stuff happen. We wanted to cover that. And so I have felt last week of like, where's all my time gone? Like I have,
Yeah.
and it took me looking at that report, be like, oh, there's 8 hours into Liftoff that I haven't spent since January, and nothing else really moved out of its way, so I had to fit that in. It's like, and it resolved the tension in my mind. I'm like, okay, that makes sense. It jives with what I'm feeling and how I thought about work last week, and that's cool because we're doing these one-off specials. We did 2 at once. That's a bad idea. We won't do that again. And then I can just move forward from it. I can leave it and move on and make better decisions in the future. And it was great. It was really kind of refreshing to know exactly what had happened.
Yeah, I had the exact same thing last week. Was a lower productivity week for me as MacSparky, and I'm like, well, what happened? And just to, I guess, contrast, I look at the data every week. In fact, because I've got it on my iPad, I see it all the time. But last week, I had to do some stuff with my daughter that ended up taking most of Saturday, and then all day Sunday. It was Easter. We had some medical stuff we were working on, and so last week, if I look at the time, I say, oh, okay, I know exactly why last week was a little slower than normal. And that's okay. It's when you don't know why that scares you, right?
Yeah.
So it really is no trouble for me to look at the stuff. And I really like using that move the needle tag, because like I'll look at, well, how much time did I spend this whole week? Like, what if I spent 50 hours on MacSparky, but I only spent 20 hours moving the needle? Well, that is data I need to know. Like, what's going on that I'm not actually producing? If I'm going to spend that many hours on this thing, it should be moving the needle. If it's not moving the needle, maybe I need to find a way to spend less hours on the other 30 stuff,
Yeah.
So I find that a really nice lens. And then the maker manager stuff just kind of goes to my kind of frame of mind. And maker for me isn't just like making field guides. It's maybe, gardening or working in the wood shop or making music. I mean, maker to me is being a maker. It doesn't necessarily tie to revenue, but that's because I track everything. But it gives me a different view. I'd be curious if you tried that sometimes to do like kind of try and do the while I'm awake tracking and see if that gave you any additional benefit or not.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that while we've been recording, and where I think it may be useful for me is once the kids are out of school for the summer, because I know that my productivity generally goes down in the summer when they're home because they're out doing stuff. My wife's a teacher. She's off during the summer. I want to spend time with them. Right. And I think that may be a good opportunity to add a couple of different timers. Maybe it is just as generic as family time to see that impact and to, again, to understand what's happening more clearly. I'm going to make a task to revisit that next month once the school year winds down.
What I find is sometimes I feel like I'm working too much. And when I see how much time I've logged in family time, the number is lower than I want it to be. And I realize, okay, I can quantify it. Or sometimes I feel like I don't get to spending time with my family. Then I'll look and say, well, wait a second, I logged 30 hours with the family last week. Well, what was I doing? And how come I don't feel like that? And I don't know, it just gives you, just getting back to the whole point of this show, if you've got, fairly reliable data it makes it a lot easier to understand what's going on. And as humans, we are terrible at like keeping track of what we did and how much time it took.
Yeah, definitely. It's, it's one of the things, like, especially if you're self-employed or you do freelance or just a side project, right? Like, trying to make decisions on how you're spending your time without the information of how you're actually spending your time. I mean, you're making decisions in the dark. And that's really what sort of finally opened my eyes to this, because I had several attempts over the years at tracking my time over the course of a bunch of different apps. In fact, when I first went independent back in 2015, I ran another app that unfortunately it's really gone by the wayside, or we would have mentioned it here. Again, I re-downloaded it. I was like, oh, you're really bad now. That makes me sad.
Yeah.
But even then, I did it then to help understand what I was doing and see what made sense and what didn't. And I've turned to it in sort of times of need. But my hope is by doing it consistently now, and I've got no plans on stopping it, that I can get ahead of these decisions, get ahead of those stressors that, I would used to turn to time tracking to try to fix, like, after they'd already happened. And I really think now that having a system that works for me, that I understand, that I know is giving me good data back, that, my hope is I can head off some of those things and be, all around happier in my work and more balanced as a person because of it.
Yeah. And see, that's the advantage for me of tracking all awake time, is I know how much time I spent on hobbies, how much time I spent on family, how much time I spent taking care of the dog. And I can put that in context of my working time. And it really does give me a general sense of how balanced I am. One thing I wanted to point out, though, this isn't just something for precious self-employed nerds, right? I mean, Stephen and I are lucky enough to be in that position. But I used this stuff when I was working in the law firm for other people. And you could use it if you're in a big company or if you're, a stay-at-home mom or dad. I mean, I think this data can help you no matter where you are in life. I remember at my old firm, at one point I had a meeting with my boss, and he says, how are things going? And I'm like, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, well, I'd like you to take on this other thing. I said, well, let me just show you. Last week I spent, 15 hours in meetings, and I spent, I gave him the data, and I'm like, so what do you want me to drop so I can take on this other thing that you want me to take on? You know? And it's like, he's like taken aback. Right. And, that's the kind of, that kind of data can arm you in a big company. So I feel like this can be useful to people in any position in life. So I hope we can help you out a little bit with time track. I know this was a nerdy topic, but if you've got some experience with this or ideas or questions, head over to the Mac Power Users forums at talk.macpowerusers.com. We've got a thread just for the show. So that'd be a great place to share ideas and thoughts. And Steve and I will check it out, and I'm sure other people can help you too. If you've got some ideas for setups, put them there too. We'll look at that as we start prepping that show in the future. We are the Mac Power Users. You can find us over at relay.fm/MPU. Want to thank our sponsors for today: 1Password, TextExpander, Indeed, and ZocDoc. And we'll see you next time.